I had spent months planning my graduation party. As a newly minted college graduate, I wanted to celebrate my achievements with my friends and family. I had also invited a few online friends, people I had connected with through various social media platforms and chat rooms. One of them in particular piqued my interest. His name was Mike, and we have been chatting for months, bonding over our shared love for books and movies. I understand the fear of meeting people online. But after really doing my research, I was confident that not only Mike was real, but that he was a genuine person. The day of the party finally arrived, and my excitement was just palpable. As the guests began to trickle in, I eagerly scanned the crowd hoping to catch a glimpse of Mike. We had never met in person, but we had exchanged pictures and video chatted countless times. So I had a general idea of what he looked like. When I spotted him standing by the refreshment table, I felt my heart race. He looked even more handsome in person with a charming smile and deep-set eyes. I approached them and we struck up a conversation, immediately hitting it off. I was relieved and excited that Mike was exactly the Mike that I had imagined. As the party wore on, Mike and I spent more and more time together. He was witty and engaging, and I found myself drawn to him. However, as the evening progressed, I began to notice subtle inconsistencies in his stories. He would mention details that didn't align with what he had previously told me, and he seemed to dodge certain questions about his past. It seemed fishy, but I was trying to chalk it up to just my imagination, I guess. The more I observed him, the more I realized that there was just something off about his behavior. He seemed overly interested in my friends, asking probing questions about their lives and relationships. At times, his gaze would linger on them for a little too long, making them visibly uncomfortable. My unease grew as the night wore on, and I decided to confront him about the inconsistencies in his stories. He brushed off my concerns, assuring me that he was just nervous and had misspoken. I wanted to believe him, but had this nagging voice in the back of my mind told me that something wasn't right. I used to have a horrible tendency to always believe people and be naive, and give them the benefit of the doubt even when alarm bells were blaring. I exhausted myself to the bathroom and pulled out my phone, doing a quick search for his name and any information I could find about him. Believe it or not, to my horror, I discovered that Mike wasn't who he claimed to be. The man I had been chatting with online was in fact a convicted stalker who had served time for harassing and terrorizing multiple women. All the information you could ever want was right there, including his haunting mug shot. And now this guy was sitting at my party. How I didn't think to look this stuff up before was just another indication to me of how naive I am about the world. And panic set in I realized the danger I had unknowingly invited into my life. I knew I had to get them out of my house and away from my friends. I called the police, and they advised me to keep him occupied until they arrived. Even though Mike wasn't doing anything illegal, I don't think they figured it would be safe to check in and make sure the party was safe. I returned to the party trying to maintain my composure as I re-engaged it felt like an eternity, but eventually, I saw the lights of the police cars outside my window. As soon as Mike saw the lights, his expression instantly changed. With intense anger in his eyes, he looked at me and said, "What are they doing here?" And it became erratic. Without even knowing why the police were called, he assumed it was for him. And he started to shout, "Can't believe you do this? You don't me. You think I do this to you?" I tried to play stupid, since I assumed that there was no way he could even know that it was me who called the authorities. The officers entered the house and swiftly tried to apprehend Mike, who at this point was just starting to go completely off the rails, yelling thanks. He started to pick up chairs and end tables and throw them around the room. He looked at me and shouted in my face, "Gonna be sorry." As the cops finally got a hold of him, he started to calm down. It was speaking to him in a quiet and calm voice, so low that I couldn't hear what they were saying. I could only see Mike panting like he had just run a marathon. And he looked genuinely shocked by the turn of events. As they led this guy out of the house, not in handcuffs, he stared at me with a mixture of confusion and anger. I couldn't help but shudder, realizing how close I had come to potentially fallen prey to his sinister intentions. And according to one of the officers, apparently this is how Mike engaged his last victim by winning their affection via social media and various other social platforms. And what was scary about Mike was that the man you would see in the pictures and videos was the man you got. There was no catfishing, no tricks, and no ruses. The sociopath would invite himself into your circles and break down the walls from the inside. A lot of monsters hide behind the internet, but not Mike. He used the internet as a jumping pad to enter your real life. The party ended on a somber note, I guess. But my friends and family rallied around me, offering their support and comfort. The experience was a sobering reminder of the dangers that can lurk online, hidden behind charming smiles and carefully crafted personas. And found to be more cautious in the future. Grateful that I had managed to escape whatever harmful situation I could have fell into. This story took place 8 years ago, shortly before I graduated. I remember that time very vividly. The hope and the fear that came with closing one chapter and starting a new one. My friends and I rented a house during our last 2 years of school, and most of us had already packed up some of our belongings to head back home shortly after graduation. All of my friends that lived in the house, besides, I went to high school with me. So I knew that we would still be in close contact in our hometown after graduation. Anyway, the story starts out with 3 or 4 of us going into campus to pick out our cap and gown for the ceremony. I think we had to go to the bookstore and wait in line to pick up everything we needed. I was last in line and could see that my friends were finishing up, but I had yet to be helped. And was then waved over by a young guy who looked like he may have been a freshman volunteer or something. When I walked over, he said something to me. But the tone was so low that I had to say wait a few times for him to speak up. He then apologized, cleared his throat and asked me for my name and gave him my name and stood there as he sorted through the list looking for my name. He eventually found it when it came back to the boxes and pulled out my cap gown and some paperwork and handed it to me. It must be shy or nervous. I thought because he had been avoiding eye contact this entire time. As I said thank you and was ready to leave, I heard him mumble something again under his breath. "Excuse me," I said, and this time after clearing his throat, he looked right at me and said, "Do you know what you're wearing under it?" Stare was blank. I didn't know what to say. I think he sensed that I was taken aback, and he quickly put his head back down and shuffled paperwork and said my sister wore one of my grandmother's dresses under hers. Sorry, I was just making conversation. Thank you, and walked away. I slowly walked away and saw my friends laughing in the hallway, and I caught up to them. One of my friends, Stacy, asked if I was okay, and she said I looked like I was ready to throw up. I told her about my strange encounter, and she laughed and said she felt bad for the poor nerd. She said he would probably think about it all day and wish that he had said anything else. And that somehow made me feel better and quickly pushed it out of my mind. A few nights later, we were having a small send-off party at her house. It was a small group of maybe 15 or so people, and it was nice to see some of my extended friends whom I wasn't sure if I would or wouldn't stay in contact with once we officially graduated and went back to our hometowns. The night was fun and mostly uneventful. And then at about 1:30 a.m. we got a knock at the front door. I think the 3 or 4 of us who heard it all huddled in the living room to try and see if we could see who it was in the front porch. We looked down all the adjacent windows and really couldn't see anything. We decided to leave the chain lock attached and crack the door just in case someone was there. But when we cracked the door, no one was there. Most went back to the bedrooms, but Stacy and I stayed in the living room on the couch and turned the TV on. After we chatted for a little bit, I could feel that I was getting tired again. So I decided to head to my room, which was just off the living room. After about 20 minutes in bed, I felt like I was hearing a scratching sound. And I couldn't figure out what it was. But I thought maybe something under my bed was scratching the floor when I moved, or something hanging on the wall was moving and scraping. I'm not sure what persuaded me to do what I did next, but I got up and blocked the bedroom window, which I noticed for the first time was unlocked. After hearing and on and off for another 20 minutes, I got up out of bed to see if I could find the source of the annoyance once and for all. As soon as I got out of bed, there was a huge thud on my bedroom window, which scared the absolute crap out of me. I ran quickly to the window to see if I could see anyone or anything. I didn't see anything. But after that, the scratching noises stopped. I stayed awake for most of the night after that. I wasn't able to get comfortable and didn't really feel very tired after the front door. And now my window. 2 days later, we were getting ready on the morning of graduation. And some of us had a drink or two to celebrate. But mostly we were packing up some final stuff in our cars so we could head home after the ceremony. I remember I was doing my hair when we heard another loud knock at the door. Was running a little late, so I didn't bother answering it, even though I was closest to the door. I remember hearing someone answer the door and then calling my name. They said, "It's for you," in a weird voice. I have that a man room, excited, thinking maybe it was my family on their way to the venue for the graduation. But when I saw, stopped me dead in my tracks halfway to the door. It was the person who helped me with my cap and gown on campus. The nerdy kid. I don't really remember exactly how the conversation went, so I'm just going to paraphrase. But I asked, "Why are you here?" To which he replied in a soft voice that I could barely hear. I wanted to wish you could look annoyed and a little creeped out. I said, "Okay, but how did you know where I lived?" And he responds, "Well, I was here the other night." "You had a party, remember?" Increasingly more creeped out. He said, "Yeah, we had a party, but you weren't here." And then looked up at me and said, I didn't say I was inside." I just yelled right in his face and said if he didn't leave right away, I was going to call the cops. My friends heard me yelling and came rushing to the door, but it was too late. I'd already slammed it and locked it. I told my friends what had happened and acted like I was fine, and it didn't faze me. But inside, it really put a damper on the day. I couldn't quite focus and enjoy graduation. And I felt as though I was going through the motions. I know for some this story may not be insanely scary, but this is one of the most unsettling events in my entire life. Often think about what would have happened if I didn't lock my windows that night. The positive thing is that after that day, I was back home, and I've only been back to my college town I think once or twice to visit. This time of the year I tend to think of the story. When you start to see graduation cards and decorations at the stores. I'm just thankful that I've never have to see that creepy cap and gown guy ever again. The moment we tossed our caps into the air, a sense of freedom washed over me. High school was finally over and my friends and I couldn't wait to celebrate our newfound independence. We had planned a weekend trip to a nearby lake house, eager to kick off the summer and leave our high school days behind us. We set off immediately after the graduation ceremony. Our cars packed with swimsuits, snacks, and infectious excitement. The sun shone really brightly as we cruised down the highway. The wind whipping through our hairs, we sang along to our favorite songs. Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus may have been played 2 or 3, or maybe even 12 times. But as we drove, I couldn't help but notice a car that seemed to be just following us. It had been behind us since we left the school, and the longer it stayed there, the more uneasy I felt. At first, I thought it was kind of funny that had been following us for so long. But once he got to the part of the trip where traffic was rare is when I really started to get uncomfortable. I mentioned it to my friends, but they just dismissed my concerns, assuring me that it was probably just some coincidence. The few times then looked back, all I could see from my vantage point were 2 unsettling-looking men who both sat just completely motionless in the car. It looked to be older, but that's about all I could make out from wherever sitting. My friends were probably right. I was always the one who always worried in high school, and I was a little bit paranoid. We arrived at the lake house in the late afternoon, the sun casting a golden glow across the water. We quickly unpacked and headed down to the shore, eager to enjoy the last few hours of sunlight. I'd almost forgotten about the car that had followed us, and worries washed away by the sound of just laughter and the gentle lapping of the waves. As the sun began to set, we gathered around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows and just reminiscing about our high school adventures. The evening was perfect, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the incredible friends that surrounded me. And that's when I noticed them. Two men standing at the edge of the woods, their faces seemingly obscured by the shadows of the trees. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that they were the same men that I may have seen driving behind us earlier. They just seemed to be watching us. I felt it to my intuition, and I instantly felt sick. I quietly alerted my friends to their presence, and we collectively decided to head back to the safety of the lake house. As we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the men were still watching us, their intentions unknown, but still very unnerving. We locked the doors and windows, our laughter replaced by this sort of tense silence. We tried to brush off our fears and enjoy the rest of the night. But the knowledge that we were being watched cast this dark shadow over our celebrations. My friends eventually passed out. But I was up the entire night, gasping and jumping in every little sound I heard. It was truly one of the longest nights of my entire life. The following day, we ventured out of the lake house, determined not to let the creepy men ruin our trip. We stuck together, always keeping an eye out for any sign of them. And as the day wore on, our anxiety began to fade, and we once again found ourselves laughing and just enjoying each other's company. But as night came, the men returned, and this time even closer to the lake house. Terrified and unsure of what to do, we decided to just call the police and report the situation. Unfortunately, this was easier said than done. None of us had any service on our cell phones, and even the Wi-Fi was pretty shoddy there. Eventually, one of us was able to get through. And they advised us to remain inside and assured us that they would send a patrol car to check on us. Hours later. Yes, I said hours later, an officer arrived and spoke to the man who at this point were basically on our property line. The cops instantly told us to calm down as they approached the men. They claimed that they were simply camping in the area and meant us no harm. The officer warned them to just keep their distance and left, assuring us that we had nothing to worry about. One of the officers even said, if you don't like being alone in the woods, then don't camp. Despite the officer's weak reassurances being somewhat rude as well, we couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. We spent the remainder of our night on edge, the carefree excitement of our graduation celebration tainted by fear. Shortly after 2 a.m., we thought that we could hear floorboards creaking just outside the house. We all grouped up, and to the horror of all of us, those two men are now standing on the back porch, right outside the sliding glass door. They just stared inside, not moving or saying anything at first. They both had these sort of expressionless faces that were easily in their 50s at least. Both were skinny with patchy-looking beards and the skinny faces that appeared to be almost sunken in. Finally, one of the men spoke in a weak and shaky voice. "Hey, can we borrow some ketchup?" ran out. One of my friends was screaming and the rest of us were basically in tears. The men didn't even react to our reactions. He just kept saying the same line repeatedly about the ketchup. The worst part of the nightmare was when he grabbed the door handle and tried to open it, saying, "I just need some ketchup, guys. Come on, open the door." Finally, one of the friends got through the police again, and frantically she explained what was happening. Thankfully, the cops showed up much faster this time and actually looked to have a sense of urgency. In the length of the scene in front of the house, the two men fled into the woods and thankfully never returned. Probably because the cop stayed in our driveway for the rest of the evening. At dawn, as we packed up her belongings and headed home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Our weekend trip had been marred by the unsettling presence of the two men, and I was eager to put that experience far behind me. The incidents, it is a sobering reminder that as we embarked on to the next chapter of our lives, we would also face new challenges and dangers. We learned to be more cautious and aware of our surroundings anywhere, anytime it can happen. As I stepped into the dimly lit house, the atmosphere of the graduation party enveloped me. Laughter and chatter filled my ears, while people in their late teens and early 20s mingled sipping drinks and reminiscing about their high school and college years. I felt like a stranger here, a friend of a friend, and I really didn't know anyone. My buddy Mark had invited me, assuring me that it was going to be a great time. He had an uncanny knack for disappearing gatherings like this though, leaving me awkwardly to just navigate the landscape of my own. As I wandered to the crowd, I stumbled upon a small group of people huddled around a game of Truth or Dare. I thought this was a little strange, since I hadn't played Truth or Dare since I was in middle school. But I have to say I was intrigued, so I joined them and introduced myself. The game seemed to be the perfect icebreaker. And my turn came quickly, and I just said dare, confidently hoping to make an impression. One of the girls with this mischievous grin dared me to explore the abandoned house at the end of the street. Judging by her look, I thought that it was going to get dared something much more interesting, like kiss somebody or something like that. Exploring an abandoned house was not something I found objectively scary, but I could tell by the gastron glares that this house had a notorious reputation among the locals here. Not wanting to lose face, I agreed, and a small group of partygoers decided to tag along for the adventure. As we approached the ominous-looking house, I couldn't help but feel chills. The dark windows and overgrown yard gave the place this really just sinister vibe. It looked like every cliché abandoned horror movie you've ever seen in any movie or show, and I hesitated for a moment, but the laughter and jeers from my new companions pushed me forward. We pried open the front door and stepped into the darkness. The air was stale and a thick layer of dust covered everything. And flashlights illuminated the interior, revealing walls covered in peeling paint and the remains of once pretty elegant furniture. At first, I was fascinated by this place. I had this weird fascination with abandoned things. For me, there was a strange beauty in the history of something that had just been forgotten by time. I looked around some more than I could tell the people that came with me were terrified. One girl named Chantel was draped on my arm as if though she had known me her whole life. To other guys, whom I can't remember their names, just sort of followed behind me in an extremely tense fashion. Part of the dare was that we had to explore the house and then stay inside for at least 10 minutes, which again seemed like nothing to me. We made our way to this gorgeous-looking back room with all wooden interiors in this high cathedral-like ceiling. The room appeared to be some sort of study or office when the house was in use. Books, desks, and a few couches were scattered throughout the room. I told the group that we could sit here for the next few minutes and wait out the clock. Reluctantly, though, they all agreed. While we sat there, I asked why everyone was so afraid of this house. One of the guys started to tell the story. He said in a shaky and terrified voice, "I'm not exactly sure how long ago, maybe 30 years or so. A couple lived here. They sent their kids to some boarding school, and while the kids were away, the wife went nuts and murdered her husband. When the cops came, the woman was just sitting in the house, probably in this room, holding the gun in like a trance-like state, and the cops arrested her immediately. Nobody knows what happened to her after that, or whatever happened to the kid. But judging by the actions of the woman, people think the house is haunted, like an evil presence lives inside the house, causing the wife to do that to her husband." I must admit, I enjoyed the story, but I audibly laughed out loud when the kid told me the story. I couldn't help but think of movies like Amityville Horror or any other number of possession movies. I could tell the group was a little annoyed at me, but I didn't want to come across as the young person who tried to defuse tension and anxiety with laughter, but I truly felt that this was all just ridiculous. I tried to be as polite as I could, but basically told the group that I don't believe in any supernatural paranormal stuff and just told them not to worry. But about 2 minutes left on our timer, I suggested that we go wait by the front door. Just as we approached the main hallway that would lead to the front door, I stopped abruptly. Group was paralyzed. Chantal whimpered out, "What is it?" Why, she stopped. And I couldn't believe what I had seen. Just up ahead, I saw this person moving from one room to another. My brain tried to rationalize what was happening. My first thought was that somebody from the grand party had come in and was trying to play some joke on the younger guy. I told the group I saw somebody, and they became hysterical with fear, begging to go back into the room. I decided to prove to everyone once and for all that ghosts and demons don't exist. Another, if this was a prank, they weren't going to scare me. I approached the room that I saw the person run into. I busted through the doorway and shouted, "Hey, I know you're in there." Without hesitation, from the dark corner of the room, the person ran right at me. I shouted, falling out of the way. And in that same instance, the closet door swung open, and 2 other people ran out of the room. I got up and looked as the 3 figures ran down the hall into the main room and barreled through the front door. I could hear the screams and shouts from my peers that remained outside, and they got up and grabbed my group, and we ran outside next to confirm to the other partygoers that we were okay and unharmed. When we were outside, we could see those figures way out in the distance, still sprinting. Our adrenaline was through the roof as we collectively tried to catch our breath from this horrific experience. I went back inside and inspected the room where I saw the person run from originally. There were cans and empty bags of chips and candy. It became clear right away that these shadowy figures were not entities, but just some homeless folks who were squatting in the house. Even without logical explanation, it didn't make the experience any less scary. Several months later, I had to read a paper for a college class, and I decided to look up some information about the house. I was surprised by just how accurate the story was that the partygoers told me. A woman did murder her husband in the house. And as far as I know, she's still locked up somewhere and still alive. To anyone who reads this or hears this on Let's Read, there's no demons or evil spirits. This was the unfortunate outcome of a couple in the poor mental state whose brains were just not wired correctly, and the outcome was horrific. And these are the types of stories that tall tales are born from, and it's easy to see why. I will say some good came out of that graduation party that Mark took me to all those years ago. I started to date that Chantel person I told you about, not a real name, but several months after we explored the house. And now, after everything is said and done, we're actually engaged to be married. So not only did this graduation party give me an exciting thrill and memory that I'll always have, it also introduced me to my future wife. Life sometimes, my friends, can be strange. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content.